friends, today we are starting a new series which talks about understanding popular culture. And as all of us are aware that culture includes many things: our language, the question of our identity, the way we dress, what we eat. All this comes under the purview of culture, and some of the scholars like Raymond Williams, he has said that culture is a way of life. So definitely whatever we do in our life, whether in terms of eating habits, whether in terms of dressing patterns, what our thought processes are, the kind of religion which we follow, the language which we speak, all of it comes under the purview of culture. And when we talk about popular culture, it relates to the kind of thing which is more associated with the majority of people. Popular culture can be understood that a large number of people or masses, they are following a kind of cultural practices which are there, so that becomes popular culture. And in comparison, in contrast to the popular culture, there is another culture which is known as the elite culture, or the culture of the gentry or the upper classes. So what we will try to do in this section is we will try to understand what popular culture is, the kind of various definitions in the context of culture, the way it has been defined by the scholars, and we will also talk about the various kinds of aspects which are associated with the popular culture. In the context of the kind of references, one can see the source material of the School of Open Learning, University of Delhi, on the cultures in Indian subcontinent, and John Story, Cultural Theory in Popular Culture, Firoz Rangoonwala, 75 Years of Indian Cinema, मनोज शर्मा, आधुनिकता और सांस्कृतिक रूपांतरण, संस्कृति, मीडिया और उपभोग में उभरती प्रवृत्तियां इन अनिरुद्ध देशपांडे एडिटेड 20वीं सदी के इतिहास के कुछ प्रमुख मुद्दे. So these are some of the readings which one can refer when is talking about culture. And when we talk about culture, we always say that cultures are always dynamic in nature, because over a period of time we see that how cultures, they also change. So from that perspective, we see that cultures, definitely they are being acquired, and it is not any kind of a personal acquisition, but how it has been handed down from past as part of some kind of a tradition. So in this context, we find that scholars, they have tried to understand culture, and scholars like E.B. Tyler, he has conveyed that the complex whole, which includes knowledge, belief, art, law, morals, customs, and any other capabilities and habits which are acquired by men as a member of society. So he has tried to convey culture in that context, and we have seen that how historians and anthropologists, they have given a number of definitions or a number of explanations with regard to culture. And scholars like Manovsky has talked about how culture comprises inherited artifices, commodities, ideas, values, habits, and technical process. So culture has some kind of a material content, a body of knowledge, and the social organization. So in this sense, when we try to understand culture, and over a period of time, that how different kind of studies, they have tried to define culture. And especially in the 19th century, we find that the inflections of the tradition and everyday life dimensions, they were being added, and ideas like folk culture and national cultures, they emerged around this time. And the German concept of Kultur basically equated culture with civilization and with individual or collective moral progress. So in different societies, the way culture has been understood, the kind of concept which has been defined, and how culture has been in a way equated with civilization as well. And we see that how anthropologists, they have tried to understand or apply culture in different contexts, and especially in the 20th century, and how it has been very central to the discipline till date. And we also see that how culture is to be found everywhere, and not just in the high arts or in the Western civilization. And as I told you earlier, that how scholars like Raymond Williams, in his work Keywords, he sums up the historical shifts into three current usages. First one is to refer to intellectual, spiritual and aesthetic development of an individual, group or society. So when we try to understand culture, then we find that the various kinds of usages, they have been defined by Raymond Williams, and he refers to the intellectual, spiritual and the aesthetic development of an individual or a group or a society to explain culture. Secondly, he says that to capture a range of intellectual and artistic activities and their products, and these products could be the film, art, theatre, and we find that when we use them in this kind of a usage, culture is more or less synonymous with arts. Thirdly, to designate entire way of life, activities, beliefs and customs of a people, group or society. So we find that these kinds of applications, they are very comprehensive in nature, and they capture different arenas or different aspects that way, that how culture has also been applied in the context of the arts, and at the same time we are also trying to designate that how the entire life or the way of life of an individual, the various kinds of activities in which an individual indulges, and the kind of beliefs and the customs which are being followed by an individual, all of them, they are part of that culture, and culture encompasses all of them. And we also see that how basically popular culture is understood to be accumulated store of the cultural products such as the music, art, literature, fashion, dance, film, television, radio, all of them, and how which are being in a way used by the non-elites or the common masses. And there are scholars, those who have tried to study popular culture, they say, one of them is John Story, who says that the popular cultural products, they appeal to a broad spectrum of people, and the popular culture keeps changing constantly and is specific to time and place. So the dynamism of popular culture is always there, and scholars like Peter Burke, they have argued that despite there being a general similarity in popular culture in Europe, there were variations in it depending upon whether culture hailed from highland or lowland areas. So one has to also see that the kind of when we tend to understand popular culture, and how popular culture and the elite culture, they are being seen by the scholars, those who are working in these kinds of in this kind of field. And we have also seen that elite culture refers to the culture of an upper class or educated people, and scholars like Matthew Arnold, he has conveyed that how high culture is a force for the moral and political good, which is generally a widely held view. And others like T.S. Eliot, they have conveyed that how both the components of culture, they are essential parts of a complete culture. So one has to focus on both the high culture as well as another kind of a designation which is referred to as a low culture. And scholars like Pierre Bourdieu, they have seen that how high culture refers to the taste, which includes etiquette, appreciation of the fine food and wine, and even military service, but also refers to different social codes supposedly observed in dominant class, and they are not accessible to the lower classes. And on the other hand, Gramscians, the people, those who are following Gramsci's idea, and they have seen it as an instrument of social control, and they have seen that how high culture is generally associated with the appreciation of what is sometimes referred to classical or the high art, and it includes the visual arts, especially the paintings, classical music and performing arts. For example, English cinema, opera, classical theatre, poetry, all of them, they are seen in the realm of high culture. So these examples of high culture, they are trying to distinguish themselves from the popular culture, and the realm of popular culture, it is being in a way talked about, belongs to the common masses, and how many a times we see that the elite culture or the high culture is seen to be more superior to the lower culture or the popular culture. So these kinds of distinctions could be seen in this particular sphere, and we also find that many a times high culture is often seen as a representative of the highest form of artistic and literary accomplishments of a society, and this could also be seen in the various kinds of art. When we see the various kinds of initiatives which have been taken up by the governments at different levels for the conservation of our arts heritage. And in a way, we also find that tourism has also provided an important market through the state-sponsored institutions and private dealers. So in a way, the role of the government and the various institutions which have been initiated by the government or instituted by the government, it is also very, very important. And we find that many times they also play an important role in terms of creating the artists' villages, and how these are affiliated with the museums or the institutional cultural centers for the propagation of the folk arts and the crafts, and offer as a tourist destination. For example, we see that how Shilpagram, which is the West Zone Cultural Center at Udaipur in Rajasthan, and similarly we can find in different states of India some of the villages or certain centers. They are being referred as the craft villages, and people, they visit those areas for making any kind of purchases as well, directly from the people, those who are in the process of creating those artifacts. And we also see that these kinds of things, they could also be seen in the calendar art, where we find that calendars, when they are being published, they carry advertisements. Apart from conveying the dates, they also carry the advertisements. So from that commercial angle, we also find that the calendars, they also have a lot of meaning depending upon the kind of images which they carry, and how the people, those who are watching those calendars, or they are also seen as some sort of receivers of those kinds of messages. And apart from that, we also find that in different art mediums like photography, which is a comparatively modern medium, where we find that how photographs, they create some kind of a memory over a period of time, and the role of technology in that context, that how photography developed over a period of time, and the kind of changes which came in terms of shooting, or changes which came in terms of capturing the image by the different kinds of cameras, and how over a period of time digital photography took over the place of the earlier camera rolls. And we also find that in different spheres, for example theatre, for example, we find that how Natya Shastra, which was considered to be an important source of, or where we find the origins of the theatre, and how it has taken some kind of a inspiration from all the Vedas, whether the Rig Veda, Sam Veda, Yajur Veda or Athar Veda. So how Vedas, they have contributed to Natya Shastra, and in a way we also find that how theatre as a form is in a way is also capable of securing the fourfold objectives of life, of increasing one's fame, promoting the self-confidence, and increasing one's skill in handling man and things. So from that point of view, we find that theatre has definitely played an important role, and how folk theatre in the context of the popular culture is also very, very important, that apart from being a source of entertainment to the masses, it was also trying to connect with the local audience, because the way folk theatre is using the local language and the kind of symbols which are there, and these symbols are also very culture specific, so the audience is able to relate with it in a comparatively in a more easier manner, and in this context they are able to create more impact on them. And we also see that how folk theatre is also available at a lower budget, and they also have a huge flexibility, and they have more credibility and familiarity, as the audience is able to identify with that kind of a theatre. We also find that how Nukkad Nataks, they are also widespread, and they are not only used in the college competitions or the school competitions, but at the same time We also find that various theatre groups, they also engage themselves in the Nukkar Nataks or the street theatre, and how they are able to create awareness on the various contemporary issues of relevance. And we also find that how theatre was also being used in school teaching as well, because there is a lot of workload on the students, and various kinds of subjects which are being taught to the students. Theatre provides some kind of a support or a help to the school room or classroom teaching as well. And we also find that in the context of understanding the popular culture, we also find the kind of developments which have taken place in the music, whether the Hindustani or the Carnatic music, and the various kinds of musical instruments, and the kind of variations which have come in these musical instruments. And in that context, we find that the folk music and the folk instruments, they are also very popular among the masses as well. And we also find that the kind of role which has been played by the patronage in the earlier times, that how at different points of time, different people, they have provided some kind of a support or sustenance to the people, those who are engaged in different kinds of crafts, whether music or various other kinds of artistic activities. And because of this kind of a patronage, these musical forms, musical instruments, and other arts and crafts, they were able to survive themselves, because they needed some kind of money so that they can survive themselves. And after independence, we find that how the government has played an important role in the context of establishing various kinds of institutions which are dealing with various cultural realms, and whether it is the Sangeet Natak Academy or the other kind of academies, whether the FTII or National Film Archives, or in the context of literary field, whether in the context of painting, etc., Lalit Kala Academy, for example. So all these kinds of bodies, apart from the ones which I have mentioned, we find that all of them, they have played an important role at the national level. And at the same time, we find that the state level, different states, they have their own bodies which are dealing with the culture of that particular state in terms of promoting the language or various kinds of crafts or arts which are there in that particular state. So all of them, whether the state bodies or the central government bodies, all of them, they are playing an important role in terms of maintenance of the various kinds of cultural spheres. And when you talk about other kinds of issues which are related to the kind of popular culture or cultural aspects, we find that in anthropological usage, folklore means the myths or the legends or the folk tales, folk songs, chants, formula speeches, prayers, proverbs, riddles, and a variety or various kinds of forms of the artistic expression whose medium is the spoken word. So folklore is largely concerned with the spoken word. It is not in that sense more written that way, and it has also been seen that how folklore and the folk tales, both of them, they are connected as well, because the idea of folk is largely concerned with the people or the masses. And we find that in the context of the folk tales, Rig Veda is considered to be the oldest treatise in which we find the specimens of the earliest folk songs and the ballads. And we also find that other Vedas like Atharva Veda is also a storehouse of the charms, superstitions, etc., and the kind of rituals which are being practiced by the people. And we also find that many folk songs which are sung on the auspicious occasions like marriage, childbirth, and the other ceremonies, they could be found in the Graha Sutras. And Panchatantra is the oldest book on fables. So these kinds of source material, they are also very, very relevant in the context to the idea of the popular culture. And we also find that how the gathas or the ballads which are mentioned in the Vedic literature, they may be regarded as the oldest representatives of the folk ballads. And we find that many hymns of Rig Veda, they refer to a singer as Gathin. So we find that Gathas, they were the laudatory hymns which were sung in praise of a particular king or hero in ancient India, and there are various kinds of developments which have been taking place. And in the context of the recent times, we find that many folk tales and folk songs which are composed during the national movement, they helped in the awakening the masses, and how they are also being used in the general elections, and how political parties, they use folklore, etc., to attract the voters. So in that context, they also play an important role in terms of making some kind of an emotional connect and national integration as well. We also find that how the regional kinds of folk forms like Nautanki, etc., they are not only major entertainment medium, but at the same time the kind of themes which are being used in these mediums, for example mythology, folklore, history, social problems, all of them, they are being in a way conveyed. And if you see the Nautanki scripts which became available because of the printing, which became more popular in the later times, so we have Nautanki scripts available, and some of the persons, those who have played an important role, for example Pandit Ramdayal Sharma, who recently received Padam Shri, was also instrumental in the context of the development of this art. And we also find that how patronage definitely plays an important role, whether the kings or the nobles, or in the modern times we find that how the government, it is playing an important role. In earlier guilds or the religious institutions, they were playing an important role, and how the government has established different organizations in the field of culture, whether the Archaeological Survey of India, Anthropological Survey of India, National Archives, etc., and how they are definitely playing an important role in this particular context. So we will continue to talk about the popular culture in our next lecture, and till then, thank you very much.